Welcome to Miami Mutual Bank. How may I help you?
I'd like to cash this check here, and then I'd like to take you out for a steak dinner.
Are you a real live pilot?
I sure am, little lady.
The jump seat is open.
It's been a while since I've done this. Which one's the jump seat again?
Dr. Connors to the ER. Dr. Connors to the ER.
This is irrefutable evidence that the defendant is lying.
Special Agent Hanratty, FBI.
Hello, Carl.
You're gonna get caught. It's like Vegas. The house always wins. Some nuts flying around the country posing as a pilot, calling him the James Bond of the sky. He's a kid. That's why he doesn't have a record.
30 milligrams of codeine every 4 hours. Do you concur?
I concur.
Dr. Harris.
Yes?
Do you concur?
Concur with what, sir? Ma'am, I'm sorry to have to tell you, your son has forged checks.
I have a payroll check here I'd like to cash.
I'm working part-time at the church now. Just tell me how much yours and I'll pay you back.
$1.3 million.
Nobody had a better rain on my Merry Christmas parade.
I'm getting close, huh? You will go to prison.
You're gonna have to catch me.
Ladies and gentlemen, the real Frank Abagnale.
Good morning. My pleasure to be here this morning. Welcome all of you here. Of course, this morning I've been asked to talk a little bit about my life in which the movie Catch Me If You Can was made. About 30 years ago, a journalist named Stan Redding wrote a book about my life called Catch Me If You Can. At the time Stan Redding wrote the book, he was already a 35-year veteran journalist and had written many novels and wrote Catch Me If You Can, detailing my life as a 16-year-old boy to 21. Like many writers, Stan Redding told you a story from his point of view. 25 years later, what some consider to be the world's greatest film director, Steven Spielberg, decided to make a movie about my life. And like great film directors, he decided to tell you a story from his point of view. This morning, I'm here to tell you the story from my point of view. I was raised just north of New York City in Westchester County, New York, in a little town called Bronxville. I was actually one of 4 children in the family, the so-called middle child of the 4. I was educated by the Christian Brothers of Ireland at a private Catholic school called Iona in New Rochelle, New York, where I went to school from kindergarten to high school. By the time I had reached the age of 16, an IQ of 140, almost a perfect photographic memory. My parents, after 22 years of marriage, one day decided to get a divorce. Unlike most divorces, where the children were always the first to know, my parents were very good about keeping that a secret. I remember being in the 10th grade when the father walked into the classroom and had the brother excuse me from class. I remember walking down the hallway with him as he explained to me that one of the brothers would drive me up to the county seat in White Plains, New York, where I would meet my parents and they would explain what was going on. I remember being dropped at the bottom of the steps and the brother telling me to go on up into the lobby and my parents would meet me there. I remember getting up in the lobby and seeing the sign Family Court, not really understanding what that meant. When I arrived, no one was there. After a few moments, someone came out of a back door and ushered me into an immense courtroom. I saw my parents standing before the judge. Eventually, the judge saw me at the back of the room and motioned me to approach the bench, so I walked down the stand between my parents. I remember that the judge never looked at me, simply said that my parents were getting a divorce. And because I was 16 years of age, I needed to tell the court which parent I chose to live with. I started to cry, so I turned and ran out of the courtroom. The judge called for a 10-minute recess, but by the time my parents got outside to the lobby, I was gone. My mother never saw me again for about 7 years until I was a young adult. Contrary to the movie, my father never laid eyes on me again or ever spoke to me again. In the mid-1960s, running away was a very popular thing for young people to do. A lot of them got caught up in Haight-Ashbury, the hippie scene, the drug scene. Instead, I took a few belongings from my home, packed them in a backpack, boarded what was then the New Haven and Hartford Railroad, and rode the short train ride down to Grand Central Terminal in New York. My father did own a stationery store, but actually in Manhattan, on the corner of 40th and Madison, still there today. Like all of us, we had to work in the store, so I made deliveries for my dad around Manhattan since I was about 14. I knew the city very well, so I started looking for the same type of work. There were a lot of signs in the windows, stock boy, delivery boy. I'd walk in and apply. So tell me, young man, how old are you? 16. How far did you go in high school? 10th grade. I'll hire you. And I went to work for a small amount of money, a few hours a day, but soon realized that I could not support myself on that amount of money. I also realized that as long as I was 16 years old, no one was going to pay me any more money. At 16, I was 6 foot tall. I've always had a little gray hair since I was about 15. My friends in school said that once a week when we wore a suit, I looked more like a teacher than a student. So I decided to lie about my age. In New York, we had a driver's license at 16. Back then, they were IBM cards. They didn't have a picture on them, so I altered one digit of my date of birth. I was actually born in April 1948. I dropped the 4, converted it to a 3. That made me 10 years older, or 26 years old. I walked around and applied for the same type of work. People paid me a little more money, gave me a few more hours, but even then it was difficult to make ends meet. One of the few things I had packed in that backpack was a checkbook. My father had opened a checking account for me at a small bank in Mount Vernon, New York. I had a couple of $100s in the account, so every so often in Manhattan, I'd write a check to supplement my income, $10, $15. The funds were there, the checks were good. It was my friends, my peers that would say to me, you know, you're the only guy I know who walks in the bank in the middle of New York. You don't have an account there. You talk to somebody behind a desk and they okay your check. Oh, my checks are good. Yeah, but if I walked in that bank, they wouldn't touch my check. You walk in, they don't bat an eye. Years later, reporters would say that that was my upbringing, mannerisms, dress, appearance, speech. Whatever it was very easy to do, so consequently, when the $200 ran out, I kept writing those checks. And of course, those checks started to bounce. The police were looking for me as a runaway in the bad checks, and I thought maybe it was a good time to start thinking about leaving New York City. But I was quite apprehensive about going to Chicago, Miami. I wondered if they'd cash a New York check on a New York driver's license in Miami as quickly as they did in Manhattan. I was walking up 42nd Street one afternoon about 5 o'clock in the evening, 16 years old, pondering all of these things, when I started to approach the front door of an old hotel that used to be there called the Commodore Hotel, now the Grand Hyatt. Just as I was about to get to the front door of the hotel, out stepped an Eastern Airline flight crew onto the sidewalk. Couldn't help but notice the captain, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, about 3 or 4 flight attendants dragging their bags across the curb to the van waiting to take them to the airport. As they loaded their bags in, I thought to myself, that's it. What a perfect front. If I could pose as a pilot, I could travel all over the world for free. I probably could get just about anybody, anywhere, to cash a check for me. So I walked up the street a little further to 42nd and Park. I went to cross over, but I heard a huge helicopter above me and looked up, and there was New York Airways landing on the roof of the Pan Am building. Pan Am, the nation's flag carrier, the airline that flew around the world. I thought, what a perfect airline to use. So the next day I placed a phone call to the corporate offices of Pan Am. When the switchboard was ringing, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. When they answered, Pan American Airlines, good morning, can I help you? Yes, I'd like to speak to somebody in the purchasing department. Purchasing? One moment. The clerk came on. I said, yes, sir, maybe you could help me. My name is John Black. I'm a co-pilot with the company based out of San Francisco. You know, I've been with the company about 7 years. I've never had anything like this come up before. What's the problem? Well, we flew a trip in here yesterday, sent my uniform out through the hotel to have it dry cleaned. Now the hotel and their cleaner say they can't find it. Here I am with a flight in about 4 hours, no uniform. Don't you have a spare uniform? Certainly, back home in San Francisco, but I'd never get it here in time for my flight. Do you understand that this would cost you the price of a uniform, not the company? No, I understand. Hold on, I'll be right back. And he came back and said, my supervisor says you need to go down to the Well-Built Uniform Company on 5th Avenue. They're our supplier. I'll call them and let them know you're on the way. Well, that's exactly what I wanted to know, so I went down to the Well-Built Uniform Company. Little fella, Mr. Rosen, fitted me out in the uniform. Back then, they were black gabardine, the 3 gold stripes on the arm, the gray hair. I certainly looked old enough to be the pilot. When he was all done, I said, how much do I owe you? Well, the uniform's $286. I said, no problem, I'll write you a check. I said, no, we can't take any checks. Oh, well, then I'll just pay you cash. No, we can't accept cash. You need to fill out this computer card. Then in these boxes you put your employee number. Then we bill this back under uniform allowance. Comes out of your next Pan Am paycheck. Oh, that's even better. Go ahead and do that. New York had two airports, LaGuardia and Kennedy. LaGuardia was 20 minutes from Manhattan. Kennedy was 50 minutes. Naturally, LaGuardia being the closer of the two, that's where I went. Spent most of the morning walking around LaGuardia in the uniform, trying to figure out, now that I had the uniform, how the hell do you get on these planes? I got a little hungry about lunchtime, so I walked in the luncheonette, sat down at the counter on the stool and ordered a sandwich. Moments later, a TWA crew walked in. Flight attendant sat in the booth, pilots up at the counter on either side of me, captain right next to me. Back before deregulation of the airlines, airline people just thought of themselves as one big family. They didn't hesitate a moment to talk to each other, and the captain kind of leaned over. "Hey, young man, how's Pan Am doing?" "Doing just fine, Captain." "Tell me, what's Pan Am doing out here at LaGuardia? Pan Am doesn't fly into LaGuardia, they only go into Kennedy." Well, I picked up on that right away. Yeah, we came into Kennedy, had a short layover, came over to visit some friends of mine. Matter of fact, I'm on my way back to Kennedy now. So tell me, young man, what type of equipment are you on? Airline people have a lot of jargon for things. One of them is they never call a plane or an aircraft, they call it equipment. And what type of equipment you're on meant, what type of plane do you fly? Back then, a DC-8, a 707. Of course, I didn't know that, and I thought, what type of equipment am I on? The only equipment I'm on is this stool. They must mean what type of equipment is on the planes I fly. So I thought, well, they've got the wings and they've got the engine. They always had a sticker on the engine, who manufactured the engine. So I said, yes, General Electric. All three pilots kind of just stopped eating and leaned over. Captain said, oh, really? What do you fly, washing machine? So I knew I said the wrong thing. Out the door I went. Everybody had an airline ID card, a plastic laminated card, much like a state driver's license today. Yet without an ID card, the uniform was worthless. I went back to Manhattan pretty discouraged, thinking, where would I come up with a Pan American airline corporate ID? I was sitting in the hotel room. I noticed a big, thick Manhattan Yellow Pages sitting up on the bed. So I rolled them open. There were about 4 or 5 pages of companies who made convention badges, plastic badges, metal badges, police badges. I started to call around, and finally one company said, listen, most of those airline IDs are manufactured by Polaroid, 3M company, Data Check. You need to call one of them. Finally got the 3M company on the phone in Manhattan. Yeah, we manufacture Pan Am's identification system. How come? So I tell you, I'm a purchasing officer for a major U.S. carrier. I'm in New York just for the day. We're getting ready to expand our routes, hire a lot of new employees, go to a formal ID. We're very impressed with this Pan Am format. Wondered if I came by your sales office this afternoon briefly, we could discuss quantity and price. By all means, come on by. So I went by dressed in a suit, and the sales rep opened the book. Yeah, we do United, Delta, Eastern, Pan Am. Yeah, we like this Pan Am format. Wonder if you might have a sample I could bring back. Sure, I'll be right back. And he brought me back a 5x7 glossy piece of paper with a picture of an ID card blown up in the middle of it, someone else's picture in the picture, John Doe for a name, and in bold red ink across the front, this is a sample only. I said, no, I'm afraid this won't do. You know, I'd like to bring back an actual physical card. And by the way, what is all this equipment on the floor? Oh, no, we don't just sell these cards. We sell the system. Camera, laminator. I said, we'd have to buy all of this. Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, since we have to buy it all, why don't you just demonstrate how it works and use me? Fine, have a seat right here. Took my picture, made up the card, and out the door I went. I was going down the elevator studying the card, had a blue border across the top, about 1/4 inch in Pan Am's color blue, but not a single thing on the card said Pan Am. No logo, no insignia, no name. This was a plastic card. You couldn't type on it, couldn't write on it, you couldn't print on it. Discouraged, I put it in my pocket, headed back to the hotel. As I was walking back, I noticed that I had passed a hobby shop, so I turned around and went back. Excuse me, sir, I see you sell a lot of models here. Uh-huh. You sell models of commercial jetliners? Sure, over there. And I bought a model of a Pan Am 707 cargo jet for about $2.40. Took it back to my room, opened it up, took all the parts out, but there at the bottom of the box was a sheet of decals that went on the model. And the little Pan Am logo that would have went on the tail of the plane went perfect at the top of the plastic card. And the word Pan Am and the special styling of graphics that would have went on the fuselage went perfect right across the top of the card, and the clear decal on the laminated plastic made a beautiful identification card. Pan Am says they estimate that between the ages of 16 and 18 years old, I flew more than 1 million miles for free, rode the jump seat in more than 250 aircraft around the world, and visited more than 26 countries. Pan Am says keep in mind that though Frank Abagnale did in fact pose as one of our pilots, he never once stepped on board one of our aircraft. That's true. I never flew on Pan Am because I was afraid someone might say to me, you know, I'm based in San Francisco, been out there 28 years. I don't recall ever meeting you before. Or someone might say, you know, your ID card is not exactly like my ID card. So instead, I flew on everyone else. If I wanted to go somewhere, I just simply walked out to the airport and looked on the board. United Flight 800 to Chicago. Then I went downstairs to the door marked United Operations and walked in. The operations clerk, hey, Pan Am, what can we do for you? I was wondering if the jump seat's open on 800. I need to deadhead to Chicago. Jump seat? It's open this evening. I'd like to get a pink slip pass. And I'd give him my ID, he'd write me out a pass. I'd walk out, hand it to the flight attendant. She'd open the door to the cockpit and I'd step in. There you had a captain, co-pilot, flight engineer, and a seat behind the captain called a jump seat, where pilots deadhead on company time. Now, because pilots love to talk shop, once you picked up that jargon, it was the same conversation over and over and over. So I just step on board, even Jim Bob Davis be arriving to Chicago. On the taxi out, always the same question. So Bob, how long you been with Pan Am? Been flying about 7 years. What position you fly? Right seat, which was airline terminology for a co-pilot. What type of equipment are you on? Had that one down. Perfect. Matter of fact, whatever they flew, I didn't fly, so I had no problems with that. When we'd arrive in Chicago, I'd go by the Pan Am ticket counter, but just enough to get the attention of the passenger service rep. So can I help you? Excuse me, where do we lay over? We had to deadhead a trip for somebody got ill. Never laid over in Chicago. So we use a Parma House Hilton downtown, catch a crew bus on the lower level at door 3F. And I'd go down to the Parma House Hilton and walk in, and on the corner of the registration desk, there was a little sign that said Airline Cruise. And that was a 3-ring binder. You opened it, referenced your flight number, signed in, showed your ID card. They'd give me a key. I'd stay 2 or 3 days, and Pan Am would be direct billed for my room and my meals. I also could cash a check down at the front desk of the hotel because I was an airline employee. The airline had a contract with the hotel, and they'd cash your check. But then I found out that every airline honored every other airline employee's personal check, up to $100. A reciprocal agreement still practiced today, where a Delta flight attendant can walk over to an American ticket counter, show her Delta ID, write a personal check up to $100, and have the counter cash it, and vice versa. Of course, when I found that out, I'd go out to JFK or LAX, only I'd go to everybody, Northeast, National, KLM, Air France. It'd take me a good 8 hours, stopping at every ticket counter in every building. By the time I got all the way around the other end of the airport, at least 8 hours had gone by, and what do you have in 8 hours? Shift change, new people, so I'd go all the way back around the other way again. I made a great deal of money. The only reason I quit at 18 is the FBI issued a John Doe warrant for interstate transportation of a fraudulent check. John Doe warrant meant the FBI didn't know my identity. In the warrant, the FBI said that I was approximately 30 years old. I was 18, had a great deal of money, so I hung the uniform up and moved to Atlanta, Georgia. In Atlanta, I moved into a very swank singles complex that had been built here called the Riverbend Apartments. On the application for the lease, there were many questions. One of them was occupation. I began to write down airline pilot, but the next question said employed by, supervisor's name, telephone number. I thought to myself, I'll need to come up with something that would be impossible to check out, yet something that would justify why I drive an expensive car, wear expensive clothes, and don't work much. So I wrote down the word doctor. First thing came to my mind, but nothing else. I had a very inquisitive apartment manager. Oh, I see here you're a doctor. Yes, ma'am. Well, what type of doctor are you? Well, I'm a medical doctor. However, I'm not practicing medicine right now. I left my practice out in California to come to Atlanta to invest in some real estate I have. I won't be practicing for a while. How interesting. Well, tell me, what type of medical doctor are you? And I figured, being a singles complex, pediatrician would be pretty safe. So I moved in, Dr. Frank Williams, pediatrician. Everybody called me Doc, always the typical question. So Doc, where'd you go to medical school? Columbia University in New York. Where'd you serve your internship? Harvard Children's Hospital out in LA. Once in a while, one of the guys would come over. Hey, Paul, what's up? Hey, Doc, look at my leg. I don't know what I did to it. Look, Paul, I can't examine your leg. You need to go to your own doctor, have him look at it. Of course, one of the girls came by, I always gave them a thorough examination, sent them on their way. I was young, but not stupid. I was living there for about 2 or 3 months. Everything was going just great. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. A very distinguished gentleman, mid-50s, standing there. Yes, I could help you? Is you Dr. Williams? Yes? My name is Gordon. Just moved in the apartment down below you. Wanted to come up and introduce myself. Ah, new neighbor. Come on in. Well, I'm not only a new neighbor. I understand that you're a pediatrician. Yes, I'm the chief resident pediatrician of the county hospital up the street. Dr. Gordon loved to talk about medicine. Every day on the way to the car, out to the pool, after a minute or two about the weather, he'd start speaking medical terminology. Not being able to speak medical terminology, I in turn would cut him short, but I knew eventually he would get suspicious. So every day I went to Emory University's medical library. Every day I read the daily journals from Johns Hopkins, from the Mayo Clinic. Every day I would take certain parts of the journal, memorize them in part. When Dr. Gordon pulled in his parking slot, every night I was on his doorstep, literally every single night. Hey, Doc, hear about this new theory they're using up at Mayo? What is it tonight? And I'd follow him into his apartment. He'd go in his bedroom to get undressed. I'd go in his bedroom, sit on the bed. He'd go in the kitchen. I'd follow him back and forth. He'd go to the bathroom. I'd talk to the door. Pretty soon he'd come home. Hey, Doc, I don't have time to talk to you right now. I got to go. Guys started to avoid me, which is exactly what I wanted. About 3 months later, I received a phone call from the hospital administrator of the county hospital, who was not a physician, but the administrator. Dr. Gordon suggested I call you. He said that you would be more than happy to help us out. What's the problem? On the midnight to 8 shift, I have a resident supervisor, a number of interns, nurses on his shift. Just been notified of a death in his family. He's returning to the West Coast tomorrow for about 10 days, 2 weeks. Georgia law requires a resident on duty or the house doctor be a full practitioner. Dr. Gordon said that you had a great deal of free time. You'd be more than happy to come up and cover the shift in an administrative capacity. There's no way I could do that. Why not? Well, you see, I'm not licensed to practice medicine in the state of Georgia, just the state of California, where I hold my residency. All the red tape for 10 days? No red tape. We bring it before the medical review board tomorrow morning. They'll issue a temporary certificate, and you can start tomorrow night. Now, being one who hates to pass up a challenge, I couldn't help but go give it a shot. During my stay at the hospital, no one ever doubted I was not a doctor. I resigned when my time was up. I did pass the bar in the state of Louisiana, not as the movie implied in 2 weeks, but actually in 10 weeks. Louisiana at the time did not require a law degree to take the bar. Louisiana, of course, practiced their law under the French Napoleonic Criminal Code of Procedure, as they did then and do today. And of course, Louisiana allowed you to take the bar over and over. It was strictly a process of elimination. I passed the bar, went to work for then Attorney General P.F. Grimion in the Civil Division of the State Court, where I tried cases. A lot of people say, you know, it's not so much the people you impersonated as a teenager as it is the crimes you perpetrated as a teenager. Years later, the FBI would say that Frank Abagnale, as a teenager, actually never once premeditated any crime. Everything he did was by chance. That was probably true. I was walking down a Chicago street one day counting 5 $20 bills I had in my pocket. As I was counting them, I noticed I had passed the front door of a bank. It said, "Open a checking account." So I stood outside and thought to myself, yeah, I'll go in this bank and open a checking account with this $100. I'll give them this phony Pan Am ID for identification. 2 weeks, they'll mail me 200 checks, a box of them, with this name. And with this ID, I'll cash them anywhere. So I walked in and opened the account. New accounts person came back. So here's a receipt for your deposit. These are some temporary checks. We'll be mailing you your printed checks in about 10 days. Now, being young, I was always inquisitive. So I noticed, miss, that you didn't give me any deposit slips. No, sir, they come from the check printer, be in the back of your checkbook. You'll get them in about 10 days. I was just curious in case I wanted to make a deposit, say, tomorrow. Not a problem. You see the table in the lobby has all those forms on it? You go over there and help yourself to a blank deposit slip. Then you write your account number in I gave you until you get your printed ones. So I walked over and took a big stack of them off the shelf. Nobody cared, went back to my hotel, couldn't sleep, kept staring at them. When the morning came, I went out and bought what was called a Burroughs 1000 magnetic encoder. It looked like a big green calculating machine. And I magnetically encoded my account number the bank had assigned to me the day before on the bottom of every one of these blanks. I then went back to the bank, put them on the shelf in the lobby, and everyone who came in put their check directly in my account. At about $40,000 at the end of the day, needless to say, I made a withdrawal. I was at the Logan Airport in Boston. I was trying to catch a flight. It was 11:45 at night. I ran out to the airport, up to the ticket counter. The whole airport was closing down. Rented cars, gift shops, ticket counter. Excuse me, you're closing the airport? Actually, the airport lies in the heart of the city. It comes under noise abatement control. There are no jet operations till tomorrow morning at 6:30. So I sat down wondering what to do. I noticed they were all sticking their cash and receipts in these big bank bags. Then they'd zip them closed, lock them, put them under their arm, walk around the counter and down the hall to the bank that was in the terminal. They'd stick their key in the night box, open it, drop the bag down the chute, make sure it went all the way down, closed it, locked it. One right after the other, Hertz, Avis, Delta, Eastern, Dobbs House, dropping this bag. Well, I didn't give this a lot of thought, but I came back to the airport the next night about 11:45. I had rented a bank guard's uniform from a costume store. I hung a beautiful sign over the night box, said night box out of order, leave all deposits with guard on duty. Everyone did. I was the nervous one sitting there going, how the hell can a box be out of order? I mean, this is like a mailbox. You open the box, you throw the bag down. Of course, like any criminal, sooner or later you get caught, and I was no exception to that rule. I was arrested once in my life when I was about to turn 21 years old by the French police in a small town in southern France called Montpellier. The French police actually took me into custody on an Interpol warrant from the Swedish government, who was looking for me for forgery. When the French government took me into custody on behalf of the Swedish government, they realized that I had forged checks in their country. They refused to honor the extradition request from Sweden, later convicted me, and sent me to French prison. I served my time in a place called the Maison d'Arrêt, the house of arrest, in a small town in southern France called Perpignan. It was extremely important to Steven Spielberg to actually go back to the prison I was in, into the cell that I was in, to film his piece, and to follow the guidelines set in the actual logbooks during my stay there, what the conditions of the cell were. I went from 198 pounds there to 109 pounds there. When my sentence was over, I was extradited to Sweden, where I was later convicted of forgery, and sent to a Swedish penitentiary in Malmö, Sweden, where I served a prison term. When my sentence was over, U.S. federal authorities returned me to the United States, arraigned in U.S. federal court, charged with interstate transportation of fraudulent checks and flight to avoid prosecution. Actually, I would eventually be sentenced in this city by Federal District Judge Newell Edenfield, who was the Chief United States District Judge for the Northern District of Georgia here in Atlanta. Judge Edenfield, on sentencing day, Mr. Abagnale, before the court imposes a sentence, there are two things the court wants to make perfectly clear for the record. The court recognizes that you committed most of these crimes on U.S. soil while you were still a juvenile. So this court has every intention of treating you as a juvenile and sentencing you as a youthful offender. The court recognizes that you have served time in France and Sweden, and we're about to send you to prison for the third time that some would argue is the same crime. However, the dollar amount of the crime leaves this judge no discretion in imposing the sentence of 12 years in federal prison. I served 4 of the 12 years in a federal prison in Virginia. When I was 26 years old, I had come up for parole 3 times, twice denied. On the 3rd time, the U.S. Federal Parole Board said, "We'd been considering your parole, but it comes with 2 very special circumstances. 1, if we agreed to release you, you would need to live in a city of our choice, wherever that city may be. And 2nd, you will go to work for an agency of the federal government for an unspecified period of time until your parole has been completely served. If you agree to these 2 things, we'll consider your parole." I agreed and was released. Next February, I will celebrate 30 years with the FBI. I have worked for the Bureau now for almost 30 years. Today I teach at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, where I've been training federal agents for more than 15 years at the Academy. All agents who go through the Academy, all agents who return for in-service training. I teach at Scotland Yard, at the Australian Federal Police, and about 50 other law enforcement agencies around the world, and have for close to 30 years. In 1977, the federal government received a letter from the chief executive officer of a company called Burroughs, headquartered in Rochester, New York. Burroughs printed the United States government treasury check and the postal money order under a federal government contract. They were being counterfeited, altered, and forged. The CEO's question was simple: can we borrow Frank Abagnale to come to Rochester to work with our engineers in research and development to come up with better ideas and better ways to manufacture these checks to keep them from being counterfeited? Because it was a government check, the FBI sent me to Rochester, New York on an assignment to work with Burroughs. When the assignment was over, the CEO wrote one more letter asking if it would be possible for Burroughs to retain me on an annual retainer as a consultant to their company to work with future problems dealing with issues of counterfeiting and forgery, and the government said yes. In 1977, Burroughs became my first client. Today, I have worked for more than 65% of the Fortune 500 companies in America. Companies that retain me today are companies like U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Discover Financial Services, Morgan Stanley, Standard Register Company of Dayton, Ohio, who bought Burroughs in 1983, who I still work today as their consultant. Today, there are many people around the world that say you can't open your wallet and not find the technology that Frank Abagnale developed. Whether you're looking at your 1996 currency or your 2003 $20 bill, whether you're looking at your driver's license from any of the 50 states you may be from, whether you sold a car and transferred a car title, the car title in all of the 50 states. If you buy baby formula, the can is protected by technology to keep it from being counterfeited and sold, reopened, and reused on the black market. Pharmaceuticals today that are sold all over the world. Luxury items like Louis Vuitton, or the watch I'm wearing from Audemars Piguet, which has technology in it to keep it from being counterfeited or sold on the black market. Today, these technologies are used all over the world on passports, immigration papers, customs papers, and documents, plastic, paper, luxury items to keep them from being counterfeited and replicated. I make my home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I live there with my wife of more than 27 years and my 3 sons. My oldest boy is 24. He's a law student at Loyola School of Law in Chicago. He'll graduate from law school in May. I have a son who's 24. He's a senior at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas. He will graduate in May, go on to graduate school. And I have a son who is 19, who is a sophomore at the University of Kansas at KU in Lawrence, where he's studying Chinese and Asian studies. I very rarely talk about my life. I accept about 1 speaking engagement a month, which takes me away from my business. People have always been fascinated by the things that I did. Needless to say, I sold the movie rights more than 25 years ago. I received no money from the movie, nor will I ever receive a dime from the film. I was not pleased to have Hollywood make a movie about my life some 30 years after a book was written. Obviously, I long past that in my life, gone beyond that, and was not very pleased that Hollywood 30 years later decided to make a film about my life. I never saw the script, was not involved in the movie itself, but in the end, I must say that I was extremely pleased. I must say that I was actually blessed that Steven Spielberg was the person who brought the story to the screen. Steven Spielberg loved the book. He is my age. He read it in his late 20s. He bought the rights more than 15 years ago and sat on them for 15 years. As he said, I always knew I'd make it a movie. The only question is I wanted to see what Frank Abagnale did with his life before I immortalized him on film. He obviously felt there were messages in that movie that needed to be told from my own experiences. And in the end, my family, my children, myself were more than pleased that he did not glamorize the character and told the story through his eyes about my life as a teenager and the things that happened to me. I get a lot of emails now, probably about 200 a day, My staff handles most of them. Most of them do not require responses. They come from all over the world. The DVD got released in South Africa yesterday, so we're getting a lot of emails now from South Africa. Most of them are just statements from people as young as 8 years old to people as old as 80, saying how much they like the film. What is interesting is that occasionally I get the person who writes and says, well, you were brilliant. You were an absolute genius. I was neither of those things. I was just a kid. Had I been brilliant, had I truly been a genius, I would have not found it necessary to break the law to achieve my goals. There are many who write and say, well, you were certainly gifted. That I was. I was very gifted because I was one of those few boys who get to grow up in the world with a daddy. The world is full of fathers, but there are very few daddies. Any child, girl or boy, who has had a daddy is an extremely gifted child. I had a daddy who loved his children more than he loved life itself. He was a man that made it a point every day of his life to tell you he loved you, not only by the spoken word, but by sheer physical affection. He couldn't have been better played by Christopher Walken, 6'3", every night at bedtime, 3 boys and a girl, he was in your room. He'd drop down on a knee and he'd kiss you on the cheek, he'd pull the cover up, and he'd whisper in your ear, I love you very much. He never missed a night. You grew older, you fell asleep earlier, he came home later, but you always woke up in the morning, knew he had been by your bed. Years later, my brother joined the Marines. He was 6'4", he came home on leave and he'd sleep in my room. My father would walk around to his bed, hug him, kiss him, whispered in his ear he loved him. When I was 16 years old, I was just a child. All 16-year-olds are just children. And like all children, I needed my mother and I needed my father. Americans like to fool themselves, but all children need their mother and their father. And though it is not popular to say so, divorce is a very devastating thing for a child to deal with and then deal with the rest of their life. A complete stranger told me I had to choose one parent over the other. For me, there was no choice, so I simply turned and ran. How could I tell you that my life was glamorous? I cried myself to sleep till I was 20 years old, literally. I spent every birthday, every Christmas, every New Year's, Mother's Day, Father's Day in a hotel room by myself. I had no friends, just people 20 years older than me who thought I was their age, who believed me to be somebody I wasn't. And then I spent 5 years in a cell by myself. I always knew I'd get caught. Only a fool would believe that you can continually break the law and not get caught. Let me assure you that the law sometimes sleeps, but the law never dies. It was just a matter of time. I was caught, and I went to some very bad places. My boys have grown up asking their mother, why is it that Dad wakes up in the middle of the night and goes down to the TV room? Because he doesn't turn the TV on or the lights. He just sits there all night because there are things you can't forget, things you were not meant to forget. While I was sitting in that French cell on the floor with a blanket, my father was climbing the subway in New York, 58 years old, extremely physical, athletic man who loved to run the subway steps every morning. But he tripped halfway up. He reached to block his fall, hit his head on the rail, landed at the bottom of the step. He was dead. I didn't know he was dead. I was sitting in a black cell thinking about him, how much I couldn't wait to see him, hold him, hug him, kiss him, tell him I was sorry, but I never got the opportunity to do that. I was very fortunate because I was brought up in a great country that always gives everyone a second chance. The truth is, I owe my government 800 times more than I could ever repay it for the opportunities it's given me these past 30 years. Today, I have worked for the government for 25 of those 30 years without compensation, having returned every check to the U.S. Treasury for the last 25 years, including the reimbursement of my travel expenses on behalf of the Bureau, where I travel more than 60 days a year. I am simply paying back a debt that I would never dream that I would be in a position to pay back to a country that gave me a second chance. I was very fortunate that 28 years ago on an undercover assignment in Houston, Texas, I met my wife. Didn't have a dime to my name. When the assignment was over, I asked if she'd marry me. Against the wishes of her parents, she did. Now, I could tell you that I was a born-again Christian, or I could tell you that prison rehabilitated me, or I could simply say that I grew up and I grew older and got wiser and matured. But the truth is, God gave me a wife. She gave me children. She gave me a family. She changed my life. She and she alone. Everything I have, everything I've achieved, who I am today, is because of the love of a woman and the respect of 3 boys for their father, something I would never, ever jeopardize. There comes a time in all of our lifetimes we grow older, we have children. And as every parent in this room knows, from time to time, you find yourself staring at your children across the room. They're not aware of it, and it doesn't matter whether they're 6 or 60. But you're asking yourself the same question you asked them from the day they were born. How much do I love this child? Unfortunately, there are no words, emotional or otherwise, to describe a parent's love for their child. So I would ask you to look at your own parents and ask yourself how much they've loved you. And when's the last time you called them? When's the last time you hugged them? When's the last time you kissed them? And you tell them that you love them while you can. And finally, to those men in the audience, both young and old, I would remind you what it really, truly is to be a man. It has absolutely nothing to do with money, achievements, skills, accomplishments, positions, awards. A real man loves his wife. A real man is faithful to his wife. And a real man, next to God and country, puts his wife and his children as the most important thing in his life. Hollywood made a very glamorous movie, but the truth is, I've done nothing greater, nothing more rewarding, nothing more worthwhile, nothing that's brought me more peace, more joy, more happiness, more content in my life than simply being a good husband, a good father, and what I strive to be every day of my life, a great daddy. It's been a pleasure. God bless you. Thank you very much for coming.